Okay, welcome back to the LetHub seminar. This week's speaker is Subramanya Hegde. He's currently a postdoc at HRI, and he's going to be telling us about new higher derivative invariant for tensor multiplet for n equals 2 d equals 4 conformal supergravity. Subbu, over to you.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So very happy to be speaking here, of course. So I'll be speaking about this work that I did with Bindusar and based on some work earlier done with Ivano and Bindusar. So we will discuss the construction of a new higher derivative invariant in conformal supergravity in 4 dimensions with 8 supercharges. So firstly, I'll give an introduction without supersymmetry on this program of constructing Poincare gravity invariants using conformal gravity. To those people who attended ST4, this might be familiar, and this would be a quick review. So we know that in 4 dimensions, the conformal algebra is SO4, 2, which is the same as SU2, 2, and that the algebra consists of these generators, PA for translations, MAB for Lorentz transformations, D for dilatations, and Ka for special conformal transformations. Okay, so these are the generators of the conformal algebra. What we will do in the beginning is construct conformal gravity as a gauge theory of this algebra, and then show how to get Poincare gravity from that conformal gravity theory. Okay, maybe. Okay, I mean this outline is a bit blurred. Yeah. So first I'll do this without supersymmetry to motivate why we need to go to conformal gravity, and then we will do it with supersymmetry. So this is the conformal algebra, which many of you have seen for many reasons. Okay. And now, given an algebra, we know how to construct a gauge theory. What we do is basically the standard non-abelian gauge theory formalism, where for each generator, we associate a gauge field. For example, for translation, we associate E mu A. For Lorentz transformations, we associate omega mu AB. For dilatations, we associate B mu. And for special conformal transformations, we associate F mu A. Okay, and what was discussed extensively in ST4, which I just mentioned right now, is that this MAB, D, and Ka are only the internal part of these transformations of Lorentz transformation, dilatation, and special conformal transformation. Because since we are not doing a usual gauge theory in the sense that gauge theory of internal symmetries, but we have gauge translations, right? When you gauge translations, then you get general coordinate transformations, and because of which all the space-time part of the conformal transformations is already included in these local translations. Okay, so by some basis change of the algebra, we can make sure that this omega mu AB, B mu, and F mu A are gauge fields corresponding to internal part of these transformations. So once we do that, what we have is a gauge theory, right? So for example, here, all we have used is the structure constants. And so far, for example, omega mu AB is independent of E mu. Okay? And also, we don't know if this delta P, we know, for example, that if you take x prime mu is equal to x mu plus epsilon mu and make epsilon mu space dependent, then it would look like general coordinate transformation. But does it actually implement general coordinate transformation on the fields using these structure constants? That we do not know. Okay, so only once that is ensured, only once we ensure that this P generates general coordinate transformations on fields, okay, can we say that we have constructed a gauge. We have constructed a theory of gravity, okay, and not just some gauge theory in some internal space. So that is done, for example, by demanding that P acts on E mu A as covariant general coordinate transformations, where this being covariant general coordinates is a bit technicality. Here you will have Lie derivative, but the Lie derivative will also be covariant with respect to dilatation. And this is done whenever you have a theory where along with general coordinate invariance, if you also have other gauge symmetry, then you need to make the Lie derivatives covariant with respect to that symmetry as well. So this is just that. Okay. So if you demand this be equal to this to have a theory of gravity, you will get an additional term, okay, which should be set to 0 so that you have a theory of gravity. And that gives you a constraint, okay, where R mu nu PA is the field strength corresponding to E mu A. Okay. So basically you take del mu E nu A minus del nu E mu A plus the whatever comes from the structure constants, okay? And that this is that field strength, and that field strength should be 0, okay? And in fact, as you might guess, that this equation is nothing but the torsionless constraint, the Cartan first structure equation. So you can solve this constraint to obtain omega in terms of the other fields. Okay? So once you impose this constraint, this becomes the spin connection becomes dependent on the Weyl-Bine. Okay. So, and also since it's a theory on space-time, we also assume that Weyl-Bine is invertible. So that is also used to solve this. And now, similarly, with the detailed analysis, you can find that this other condition also needs to be satisfied, where Rm mu nu AB is the curvature for omega mu AB, okay, which we had here. So that should be traceless. Okay, that is the next condition. So the theory of conformal gravity now is a usual gauge theory of the conformal algebra with these two conditions. And first condition can be used to solve for omega in terms of E and B, and second condition can be used to solve for F in terms of E and B.
So, Subbu?
Yeah.
So the second constraint,
yeah.
Where does that second constraint come from? Because I can see that the first constraint comes from the delta P acting on the E mu A acts as a general coordinate transformation. So does the second constraint come from like a delta M or something?
No. I mean, yeah. So actually, once we go to supersymmetry, the second constraint is also can be very elegantly derived. Okay? But at the level of conformal gravity, the second constraint is a bit involved in the sense that you put this condition on your gauge theory and you ask if everything is consistent. And if you can construct a Lagrangian so that you obtain conformal gravity and so on. Okay. And in the process, you will discover that this needs to be set to 0.
I see.
But one more way to think about it is, this is also said usually in popular treatments, that what we need to do is ultimately we need to go to a theory of Poincare gravity. Okay. And Poincare gravity we know has 6 off-shell degrees of freedom, right? Because there is 10 degrees of freedom of the metric, right? And four diffeomorphisms which you subtract, okay? And that defines your off-shell degrees of freedom. It has 6, right? Whereas here we have a lot of off-shell degrees of freedom. So how do we reduce these many degrees of freedom to 6, if you ask? Okay. Then when you write these field strengths in terms of the gauge fields, okay, you find that both in RP equation, omega appears with a Weyl-Bine, which is invertible. So omega appears algebraically in this expression. Okay. And F mu A appears algebraically in this expression.
Okay.
And this has the appropriate number of components to determine omega mu AB. And this trace has the appropriate components to determine F mu A, right? They have the same number of components. So another way to say it is that you need to make some gauge fields dependent. Okay. And just by writing the constraints in terms of gauge fields, it becomes obvious what constraints to put. But then I will show later in supersymmetry, just by demanding that the QQ commutator closest to covariant general coordinate transformations, I mean, I'm just mentioning it here, that will determine this constraint, and one another constraint.
I see. Okay.
So there it is much simpler.
I see. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, whenever you delete, so what is happening here is after this process, we are basically forgetting about this P gauge symmetry, in the sense that for example, whenever you do GR, right, whenever you write the covariant derivative, you don't covariantize it with respect to translations as well, because otherwise you will have del mu minus e mu a pa, and pa is del a, so the derivative itself will go to 0. Okay. So we need a way to delete this. So when we try to delete this in conformal gravity, the analysis is quite involved because no other commutators close to p. Okay. Whereas in supersymmetry q close to p, so the algebra gives a strong constraint on how this can be done. So there it becomes easy. Okay. So now we can count the number of field components. So Weyl-Bein has 16 components, right? 4 into 4, 16 components. And B mu, which is the dilatation gauge field, has 4 components. Okay? And the other gauge fields are dependent, so we won't count them. And the number of gauge transformation parameters for the conformal group is 15, right? So therefore, now the offshell degrees of freedom, usually one defines as the number of independent field components minus the number of gauge transformation parameters. Okay? So 20 minus 15 is 5. And this is the offshell degrees of freedom because we have not used any residual gauge fixing. Okay, so that will depend on on-shell conditions. Here we have not. So this has 5 offshell degrees of freedom. Whereas in Poincare gravity, we need 6 offshell degrees of freedom. So clearly, to get Poincare gravity from conformal gravity, we need another offshell degree. The way that is done is by introducing a scalar field, which has a Weyl weight. Weyl weight meaning under dilatation, it will go to the dilatation parameter times itself. Okay. In general, there could be a weight, but that weight is 1. So you can write this Lagrangian for such a field phi. Okay. And the covariant derivative is given as follows, because it's a scalar, right? So it transforms only under dilatations. So this is the covariant derivative. But when you take the double covariant derivative, B mu transforms under K transformations, for example. So therefore, when you covariantize this term in the double covariant derivative, you get F mu A. Okay. And notice in the last slide that F mu A was related to the curvature tensor. So this F mu A is related to R mu A. Okay. So where I should have defined R mu A here. So basically, when you take this, when you take this trace, okay, then if this has a term F, but if you exclude that term F, okay, and then take the trace, okay, and substitute omega in terms of E and B, whatever you get is R. It is called curvature because once you set D is equal to 0, this just becomes the Ricci tensor. Okay. So what I want you to keep in mind is that this gauge field will ultimately, this dependent gauge field will ultimately become the Ricci scalar. Okay. So here you have a matter multiplet action, okay, but it hides a Ricci scalar inside, okay, once we do the gauge fixing. So to do the gauge fixing, what we do is B mu under K transformation, it just goes to some lambda mu, okay, where lambda mu is the parameter for K transformation. So if you just set it to 0, that completely gauge fixes special conformal transformations. And phi scales under dilatation. So if you set it to a constant, that gauge fixes dilatation. So what you do is take this action, right, and then do this gauge fixing and substitute dependent gauge fields in terms of independent gauge. Okay. Because you have set B mu is equal to 0, as I said earlier, this double derivative, which has F mu A, will give the Ricci scalar, okay, because that you take a trace here. So notice what is happening. So we had a matter field action in conformal gravity, okay, but once we did the gauge fixing, why did we do this gauge fixing? Because these are the symmetries which are not there in Poincare gravity. We want to go to Poincare gravity. It does not have K transformations. It does not have dilatations, right? Only translations and Lorentz transformations are the symmetries. So we gauge fix the rest of them. But once we get the rest of them and substitute the expression for dependent gauge fields, we get the kinetic action for gravity field in Poincare gravity. So in supersymmetry, this is extremely useful because to construct the Lagrangian for a matter multiplet in conformal supergravity is much easier, whereas to directly construct supersymmetric completions of gravity Lagrangians in Poincare supergravity is extremely difficult. So this is why one does conformal supergravity, so that we can get classical Poincare supergravity action. Is that point clear?
Yeah, I have like maybe a stupid question. So can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
So in this in this process, you sort of introduce gauge fields corresponding to each of the conformal generators, right?
Yeah.
And now you've said that here that omega and f are now the dependent gauge fields.
Yeah.
But in the end, this is a choice, right? I mean, I can choose to make the other two, the B and the E, I can choose to make them dependent.
Right.
Is that something that I can do? I'm allowed to do that, right?
Yeah. So what happens is that, so what I said earlier, for example, this R, in this expression of R, omega appears algebraically, and that is very important because that means you can solve for omega without requiring dynamics.
Right. Okay.
Whereas on E, there are derivatives, right? So it becomes a differential equation.
I see. Okay. All right. Okay. So it's not a smart thing to do then, like.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Is there any other question?
Yeah, I have a question on the next slide.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, you wanted in the previous slide, you wanted one extra. I mean, you needed one extra degree of freedom. So
yeah.
Now you're saying that okay, we have to let us look at like a typical dilaton action. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And so how can you say, I mean, is there an easy way to see that this is the most general, or this is to be expected from the kinetic term? I understand the D's, but there's a 5 sitting in front also. Like, is that usual, or?
Okay. So most general as in, okay. So what we do is in conformal gravity, right? We ask the Lagrangian to be invariant under all the conformal symmetry.
Okay.
So a scalar does not transform under Lorentz transformation.
I see. Okay.
So that symmetry is obvious, right?
Right.
For dilatations, what we need to do is we have to ensure that Lagrangian has zero Weyl weight. Okay. Phi has Weyl weight 1. Okay. And space-time derivatives don't have any Weyl weight because, as I said, the scaling here is internal scaling.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have scaling. So this has Weyl weight 2. And you can check that root minus G also has the opposite Weyl weight. So the Lagrangian will have Weyl weight 0.
I see. Okay.
And the only non-trivial one is the K transformation invariance. Okay? That this is invariant under K conformal transformations. That is checked by the fact that the only thing, like if you look at these commutation relations, right? And then compute the gauge, then apply the gauge theory transformation rule. The only field that transforms under K is B mu.
Okay? I see.
So the Lagrangian will be invariant under K transformations if B mu cancels out in the Lagrangian, right? Because if it's the only field that transforms under that symmetry, it better vanish. And for this expression, that happens.
Okay.
So that determines that this is the Lagrangian.
Okay. So this is really the most general thing you can do, right? And
you can have a higher derivative Lagrangian with a different Weyl weight scalar field. So that you can do.
Okay. I see.
Yeah.
So and also you're saying that I mean, you will probably argue next that this gives you an additional degree of freedom, but so, and this is also independent of the, like, the mass term or whatever the potential term. This argument will go through independent of that, right?
What mass term?
Like so, right now you've written the kinetic term here.
Okay, I mean you can't write the. I mean this term. What I'm claiming is this L is constructed in conformal gravity. Okay.
Okay.
So scalar field anyhow will not have mass.
Okay. Fine. Thanks.
Yeah.
Subbu?
Yeah.
Is the possible? Sorry, if this is not relevant. But is the possibility of non-minimally coupled scalars, is this something that can be entertained, or is that precluded by what you said just now?
Non-minimally. No. I mean, you can. So, for example, in the conformal gravity, this is one Lagrangian we can write down, which is quadratic in the scalar field.
Right.
But for example, we can also write the Weyl square Lagrangian.
Okay.
Which is like Rm mu nu AB, Rm mu nu AB kind of a Lagrangian. Okay. So if you write that Lagrangian, then I mean that is also invariant under all the conformal transformations. Okay. You can also multiply it by an arbitrary function of scalars with Weyl weight 0. For example, suppose you have two scalar fields, phi1 and phi2,
right,
with the same Weyl weight. Then you can write f of phi1 by phi2.
Right.
And allow such terms also. They will give you different Poincare gravity Lagrangians. So that is the power of this technique, in the sense that for different actions in conformal gravity, you get various Poincare gravity actions. So the action I told you will give you some higher derivative invariant in Poincare gravity. And in supergravity, it is extremely useful, because if I just give you, let's say, Ricci scalar, this Einstein-Hilbert action, and to give you the gravity multiplet transformation rules in Poincare supergravity, and ask you to compute the supersymmetric completion yourself, it will be extremely complicated. So whereas constructing a matter multiplet action in conformal supergravity is not that complicated. So you construct various actions, possible actions, with various fields, because here we could have many fields, because this is just conformal algebra, right?
Right.
The superconformal algebra comes with specific representation of fields.
Right.
Specific off-shell representations. There are not many. So with all those off-shell representations, you ask what are the actions you can write for each of them.
Okay.
And each of them will give you a different Poincare supergravity invariant.
Is there a classification of possible Poincare supergravity actions based on the constraints that you have at the level of the Lagrangian here?
Yeah, in the sense that suppose you say quadratic in Riemann tensor, right? Then you know how many terms you can write down. You can have, for example, Riemann square and Ricci square, and everything else will be related by like some total derivatives or something like that.
Yeah, no. What I had in mind was actually just literally a classification of all possible. So this equation on the top, right, that phi dd phi. So is there a classification of all possible terms that one can write down that has the appropriate Weyl weight and conformal things like that?
Yeah, in the conformal gravity case we are discussing here, right? For this scalar field, we know what are the, scalar field with Weyl weight 1, we can write this action. And for some other Weyl weight, we know some other action to write, okay? And there are no other actions.
So, sorry, okay, you know that there are no other actions.
But in conformal supergravity, the problem is supersymmetry off-shell representations are not well understood, in the sense that on-shell representations, you can just do this representation theory analysis,
right,
which we did in ST4 also for Poincare.
Right.
Super socialgebra. Whereas the off-shell representations, there is no easy analysis that way. There are some classifications available. I mean, what I'm saying is even at the level of representations, not just the action.
Right.
And for actions, we will discuss later that the number of actions that are known is really few. But they have helped a lot in understanding black hole entropy, but the number of actions known is very few.
I see. No, yeah. So I'll just say this once more, because I think that, you're sort of skirting around the question. Maybe that's because I'm not saying it correctly, but I'm saying, is there a classification? Is the answer to that no?
Yeah, I'm not skirting around the question. Yeah, the inference was no, because
okay.
Even the representations are not well understood. What you are asking is there a classification of the Lagrangians, right? What I'm trying to tell you is that forget the Lagrangians, even the representations are not well understood.
I see.
Not classified. Yeah.
Okay.
Subbu, I have another very basic question.
Yeah.
So you said that so this Lagrangian, this matter field that you added,
Right.
You're calling this, if I understand correctly, a supergravity completion or something, right? I don't exactly know what the word you're using
No,
is.
I just mean like once we have supersymmetry, like
Okay.
what we
Okay.
have is what I'm saying is once we have supersymmetry, here you will have, instead of just one matter field,
Uh-huh.
we will have some matter multiplet action in conformal supergravity.
Okay. So, but as of right now, the reason that you needed this was to get the right degrees of freedom, right?
Yeah, that is one way to introduce this. Yeah.
Okay. So now, is it possible to have some, instead of a scalar, can you have some other vector with some other constraints so that you get still total one degree of freedom or something like that? Or should you
Yeah.
have, sorry?
Yeah, I mean, there may be other ways to get 1 degree of freedom. Yeah, I mean, but this is the one obvious one which I know. For example, what happens is you could so suppose you want to get 1 degree of freedom by something which has more than one component, right?
Right.
Then you should also have some gauge symmetries which subtract some of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
For all the fields, I know that, like for example, a U1 gauge field, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has 4 minus 1, 3 offshore degrees of freedom.
Right.
So this is the only one which has only one offshore degree of freedom.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So now, let me do something else, some other background, and then we will go to conformal supergravity, because basically this is a technique which will also be useful to people in general. Okay. This is a technique to write down gauge invariant Lagranges. Okay. So I think this digression will still be of interest, and then we will come back to how we used it to write a new action in conformal supergravity. So what we need to do is consider some manifold which has 4 space-time directions, as well as additional gauge theory directions which are appropriate to the theory. Okay, like let's say you have some U1 gauge field, then there is one direction corresponding to U1 gauge limit. So this is curly M, and there is a 4-dimensional space-time submanifold which is denoted as capital M. Okay, and the action is an integral on capital M, okay, where J is a 4 form on curly M. Okay. Take any 4 form on curly M and evaluate it at M and do the integration. Okay. That is the way to go about it. Now what will happen is that suppose you do a diffeomorphism, okay, which is done by Lie derivative. Suppose you do a Lie derivative on this 4 form, where this Xi has general, both the space-time direction and the gauge theory direction. Now this Lie derivative, in any case, on curly M can be written in terms of interior and exterior derivatives, right? But when you substitute it back here, you notice that this D, okay, restrict to the cases where, this D is still the exterior derivative on this manifold. Okay. Then D of Ixij, okay, this I'll come back to very soon. D of Ixij, okay, that is a total derivative term, so it will go away by boundary condition. Okay. So the first term being 0 guarantees that S is invariant under this Lie derivative. So therefore, and because we have included gauge transformations as well in this manifold, okay, gauge transformations are also implemented this way, which I will shortly come to. Okay. So provided we have the first term going to 0, then the action is invariant. Okay. So we need a closed 4 form on curly M, okay, evaluated at M to obtain this S. Okay. But I'll just give the explicit example, then I think it will be clear and we can go for questions. So take, for example, 3-dimensional spacetime, okay, and take this. So what we'll do is we will look at non-abelian Chern-Simons theory in 3 dimensions and show its gauge invariance. So this has the following what we call a super Weyl-Bein. Okay, it has this small EA and A alpha, where alpha is the gauge index, okay, and A is the spacetime index. And so now, when we restrict, So Veblen, we know that the interior derivative of the Veblen is given by this. Okay? Basically, Veblen is a one form, right? So when you take the interior derivative, it converts it to a zero form. That is the definition of interior derivative. And xi mu e mu a gives the interior derivative of E. Now, interior derivative on A alpha, we are doing similar to this. Okay. So, firstly, A mu alpha is also a one form, just like A on the space-time manifold. So, there is a term which is xi a alpha, okay, which comes from the fact that it is a one form on the space-time manifold. And the second term, xi alpha, is a natural generalization of this law, because Veblen was the gauge field corresponding to space-time transformations, and its interior derivative is given by xi a. Okay, we will define the interior derivative of A alpha as xi alpha plus this. Okay. Now, the motivation to do this is that once you do this, okay, and take the now you know that the field strength is given as dA minus A wedge A. Okay. Just transpose this equation, take dA to this, A wedge A to this side. Then you can write dA in terms of F and A wedge A. So what this is doing is that this was the super Veblen, right? So this is expressing dA in terms of in terms of some covariant object times the Veblen or the gauge field, okay, which are all members of the super Veblen. So once you define dA this way and the interior derivative this way, if you take dixi plus ixid, okay, for setting xi a is equal to 0, that is, suppose you want to do only gauge transformation, xi alpha, okay, then you don't care about the space-time transformation. So set that parameter to 0, okay, and then use this dA, okay. Then you can verify by using this computation that it indeed gives you the gauge transformation of A alpha. Is this point clear? So we have conveniently defined interior derivative on this larger manifold and exterior derivative to get the right gauge transformation as a Lie derivative. Is there any question?
Yeah, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide once?
Yeah.
I just have one confusion. So I thought that you were, this A alpha, can I think of it like A alpha A, EA? Can I think of it like that?
Yeah, you
right?
can think
So
of it.
I thought that the second term, in the bottom equation, xi alpha, I thought that if you set this to 0, you're basically setting the xi. I thought this. Okay, the second term I thought was coming from the action of the interior derivative on the Veblen, or no? Is that the
No. So xi alpha, right? Alpha index is the gauge transformation parameter index. So what we are doing here is that gauge. Okay, so in this slide and the next slide, what we are trying to do is, we all know how to do gauge transformations.
Right.
Can we realize it as a Lie derivative on a subset of Lie derivative on this larger manifold?
Correct.
That is the question.
Right.
So to do that, we need to evaluate the Lie derivative, which is this dixi ixid. Okay.
Yeah.
So we need to conveniently define ixi and d, okay, so that we can get the Lie derivative to act as gauge transformation.
Right.
So therefore, this Lie derivative we already know from our space-time theory, right?
Right.
And this also we know from space-time theory, in the sense that if there is since this is A mu alpha, right? Its interior derivative is xi mu A mu alpha in the space-time theory.
Okay. This was the only confusion. So this is that term. Okay. Fine.
This is that term.
Fine. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I understand. This is clear. Thanks.
Okay. Is there any other question? Okay.
So just one point. So can I summarize this as saying that basically you, since you have sort of introduced gauge fields corresponding to your various generators of the conformal transformations, what you're trying to do now is you're trying to sort of geometrize the gauge transformations themselves, right? So you want to realize them as a kind of geometrical action on a larger space. And that requires that you define your contractions and derivatives in an appropriate, smart way.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So let me just clarify that. In the introduction, I sort of made it to, these are two slightly disjoint sets, in the sense that later what we will be doing is we won't geometrize all the conformal transformations. Okay? We will geometrize only the space-time diffeomorphisms and Q supersymmetry. Okay? So what I'm doing here is sort of disconnected from what I did first. So this is a technique. It's called whatever, group manifold, Rheonomy, gauge manifold. There are various names for it. So this technique allowed us to compute. So basically, what did we want to do here? We had a Lagrangian, right? So you can ask the question: how do we easily construct invariant Lagrangians? So we are trying to answer that question. Okay, but for that, right now I am only. But that is the only commonality so far. Right now, I am just taking non-abelian Chern-Simons theory in 3D. Okay. Later, we will see that, like for all the conformal transformation, like dilatation and so on. For them also we could do it, but we will see that just like how I described here, right? Like constructing a dilatation invariant Lagrangian was easy, right? So constructing, so this will happen in supersymmetry. Most of the bosonic symmetries, you can easily make the Lagrangian covariant with respect to them. So you need not geometrize them.
Okay, I see.
But supersymmetry is harder to construct invariants, for. So therefore, we will try to geometrize supersymmetry.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Won't you also require gauge transformation for small e in your previous slide, the EA that you have?
Yeah, but right. But it is inert under this Chern-Simons, this U1 gauge transformations, right? EA does not transform.
Okay, so EA transforms only under diffeomorphism.
Right.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Only for A alpha, we need this generalization, psi alpha.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. So once we do this, okay, what we do is we can calculate dj on curly m. And then we can do various manipulations where we substitute for dA this expression f plus a wedge. Okay. So this is the Chern-Simons action. I mean, people might know this, whatever is inside. So that we are taking as J, okay, this 3 form. Okay, and then we are trying to show that D of that is 0. So in the first step, what we have done is we have just taken the D inside. So it becomes dA wedge dA. And this becomes a dA wedge A wedge A. Okay, so that is simple. So in the next step, we have substituted this expression, okay, dA in terms of F, okay, that gives 2 other A's, okay. So because of that, there are a few more A wedge A's, okay. So that is given here, okay. And again, this dA is also written in terms of F and A wedge A, okay. So so what happens in each case is that okay, I don't remember every one of these. So so what happens, for example, here, if we take F wedge F, okay, I don't have the step. If I take F wedge F, you might think it is a 4 form in 3 dimensions, so it is 0. But in fact, we are evaluating it on curly M. Okay? It could be a 4 form, but what happens is that F wedge A, if you expand it in terms of components, okay, it causes 4 antisymmetrization on only the Weyl-Bine, okay, because curly M contains both the Weyl-Bines and the gauge fields. Okay? But F wedge F will involve 4 antisymmetrizations on only the Weyl-Bines, and that is not possible because there are only 3 indices and you can't have a 4th rank antisymmetric tensor out of them. Therefore, this term is 0. Okay. I think this term is 0 by cyclicity of trace, but I don't remember, so I'll just not comment on it. But basically, using this dj, you can easily compute that this is a gauge invariant Lagrange.
I have a question on an earlier slide. So in the first slide where you introduced this integral of j, so can you go back? Here. So I mean, requiring that this dj equal to 0. Does this somehow say that, okay, if you want to work with a gauge theory, sorry, if you want to work with a theory on, Roman n, then you want that thing under, say, flows off of m into script m. You want them to be 0 or something? Is that like what you want?
Sorry, what? I didn't get you.
Like, okay, maybe I can ask you this later. I'm not completely sure what the question is, but something related to what I just said. But sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so basically this dj, I mean j should be a closed form in curly m.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether this is the statement that you want like gauge flows to be. Okay, sorry. I will just ask you this later. Sorry.
Okay. So what we will do is we will use this technique to construct a Lagrangian on supergravity in supergravity later. Okay. So yeah. So here what we are doing is we are just doing the same thing with the supersymmetry. Okay. Earlier we had the conformal algebra. Here we have the super conformal algebra, where along with Q there is a special supersymmetry S, which is there because when you take the commutator of K with Q, K which was not already there in super Poincare algebra, you get this another supercharge called S. There is also an R symmetry, SUNR cross UNR, which is necessarily a part of the super conformal algebra. Okay. So what you do is you introduce gauge fields to each of them. Okay, all these gauge fields. And then again, you obtain the transformation rule by using structure constants. Okay. But to realize this as a theory of supergravity, we will again need to impose constraints on conformal curvatures. I have not written them here, but what will happen is we had this RP is equal to 0. One way to do it is just take the supersymmetry transformation. In SUSY, any constraint that you get, you should implement it as a multiplet of constraints, as in the constraint should be 0, the Q supersymmetry of the constraint should be 0, Q supersymmetry of that should be 0, and so on. Okay, similarly S supersymmetry. So therefore, the constraint should form a multiplet. So if you just take RP is equal to 0 and take the SUSY variation, right, then the Weyl goes to gravitino. So it will give some constraint on field strength of the gravitino gauge field. Okay, so all the constraints are just obtained from the first one by SUSY invariance. Okay. Another way to say it is that Q, Q closest to P in supersymmetry. Instead, if you demand it to close to covariant general coordinate transformation, you will naturally get all the constraints when you evaluate that commutator on various fields. Okay. Sorry. The second step is that, so if you want an off-shell representation of supersymmetry, in the sense that if you want the SUSY algebra to close off-shell without needing equations of motion, then the bosonic and fermionic degrees of freedom must match. Okay. And so to get them to match after imposing the constraints, you will find that you will need to add 8 fermionic degrees of freedom. This is a doublet of Majorana fermions. So 4 times 2 is 8. And 7 bosonic degrees of freedom. This is an antisymmetric second rank tensor, so 6 components. This is a real scalar, so 1. So here you have 7, and so this is the counting. Okay, so so without the auxiliary fields, you would have had 17 bosonic plus 16 fermionic, which tells you that you need to add some auxiliary fields. Okay, so either you can do guesswork, but in reality, like there are some other techniques to obtain these auxiliary fields. Okay, once you obtain them, you count the number of bosonic degrees of freedom and the gauge parameters, subtract them, you get 24. Fermionic ones, subtract the fermionic gauge transformation parameters, you will get 24. So 24 plus 24 multiplet. Okay, and it contains all the gauge fields of the superconformal algebra. Okay, therefore it is called as the, such a multiplet is called as the Weyl multiplet. Okay, a multiplet which contains all the gauge fields of the superconformal algebra plus some auxiliary fields. But this set of auxiliary fields is not unique. Okay, so in 6 and 5D it was known some years ago, and in 4D Daniel Butter, Ivano, Bindusar, and I presented another Weyl multiplet in 4D. Okay, so it's not unique, but this is the most used Weyl multiplet. And what happens is you don't have an ordinary gauge theory anymore, right? Because you have applied some constraints on the gauge theory. Okay? Because of these constraints, the algebra, okay, like suppose you take supersymmetry variations on fields, okay, first with epsilon1 parameter, next with epsilon2 parameter, and then take the commutator. Instead of closing to covariant general coordinate transformation, it will close up to some field dependent gauge transformations. Okay? Such an algebra is called as soft algebra. Okay? And these are mathematically, they fall under the category of Lie algebroids. Okay? So this we discussed to some extent in ST4, but here I won't have the time to go through the details. But is this clear? So basically we gauge superconformal algebra, apply some constraints, add auxiliary fields, and get a multiplet. Okay? And this multiplet is an off-shell representation of superconformal algebra, which is this, okay? But it is a soft algebra. Is this point clear?
There are like almost exact parallels, right, with the conformal
Yeah.
gravity. This
Yeah.
thing. It's just that here there is an additional complication due to the supersymmetry requirements.
Yes,
So,
yes, yeah, okay. That's all. Yeah. So now there are matter multiplets also, just like how in conformal gravity we had the scalar field phi. Okay. So this multiplet, for example, is called as the tensor multiplet, which I have written here. It has 8 plus 8 off-shell degrees of freedom. It's called as the tensor multiplet because there is a two-form gauge field, E mu nu, which is a two-form gauge field, E mu nu, which is the tensor gauge field. And there is a complex scalar. And Lij is an SU2 triplet of scalars which satisfies some kind of reality condition. The complex conjugate of it and itself are related up to plus or minus 1 by this Levi-Civitas. Okay. So therefore, this is 3 components. Okay. This is 2, 5. And a two-form gauge field, you need some analysis. So it has 3 off-shell degrees of freedom. So 8 components. And the fermionic content is just one doublet of fermions. So that has 8 components, okay, 2 times 4. So 8 plus 8 multiplet. Okay. There are other multiplets, okay, such as vector multiplet, nonlinear multiplet, etc. So you remember when we use the scalar field for gauge fixing in conformal gravity, okay, we obtain the Poincare gravity action. So this process of gauge fixing through some matter field content is called as compensation. Okay? So these multiplets can be used as compensator multiplets. You can use some of the fields to gauge fix the additional symmetries that are there in superconformal algebra, but not there in super Poincare symmetry. Okay? Because ultimately we want to get physical Poincare supergravity theory. Okay? So therefore, there are matter multiplets which are useful. There is one special multiplet which is called as the chiral multiplet. Okay? And the chiral multiplet has 16 plus 16 components. But there is one triplet of scalar Bij, okay, which has chiral weight 0 in the sense that, remember, this superconformal algebra has a U1R symmetry, but the U1R charge of this field is 0. Okay? So you could think, since the U1R charge is 0, it is not, so even though it is complex, it is still consistent to impose a reality condition. Okay? Because this here the charge of LHS is 0, the charge of RHS is 0. Okay, it wouldn't happen if the chiral weight was some other number. So suppose you demand that, and then as we discussed earlier in SUSY, if you implement any constraint, you should implement it as a multiplet of constraints. Okay? So take supersymmetric variation of this constraint. Okay, and ultimately the set will close within itself. Okay, so there is a consistent set of constraints. Once you implement all of them, okay, and solve them, okay, then you will get a smaller multiplet, which is called as 8+8 restricted chiral multiplet. Okay, and the utility of this is that this 8+8 multiplet, the field components can be mapped to, or rather field components of tensor multiplets can be mapped to field components of the chiral multiplet. Okay, field components of the vector multiplet can be mapped to field components of the chiral multiplet. So what this means is that if you have an action for chiral multiplet, you have an action for the vector multiplet, you have an action for the tensor multiplet. Okay? And all this is happening because these multiplets are off shell, right? So this multiplet does not come with a predefined action. The transformation rules are independent of whatever action you are going to write. It closes under SUSY algebra anyway. Okay. Therefore, you can construct various actions. Okay. So there exists an important formula which is called as chiral density formula. Okay, where all the fields, right? This A, this psi L, this G mu nu, these are all components of chiral multiplet. Okay, and there are some background Weyl multiplet fields also, like gravity, no, and so on. That will always be the case, right? I mean, all the matter multiplets exist in the background of Weyl multiplet in conformal supergravity. So this Lagrangian just for the chiral multiplet seems useless, right? Because this is an algebraic Lagrangian, right? So it won't have any dynamics. But the usefulness of this is that you can embed some other multiplet inside this. Okay? For example, there is some complex scalar x in the vector multiplet. This A can be written as x square. Okay? And then you can try to see how other fields are embedded in other fields of the chiral multiplet. Once you substitute all of them, you will get a Lagrangian for the vector multiplet. Okay? And it is this Lagrangian which is used as a compensator multiplet to obtain actions, which later was used in black hole entropy computations and so on. Okay, so this chiral density formula, which was discovered in maybe 1982 or 1981, was a very useful formula to get actions in conformal supergravity.
Sorry, Subbu, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, so you mentioned, so this is an algebraic expression, right? This L.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit confused about how we, at the end of the day, you want a Lagrangian which has some dynamics, presumably.
Yeah.
So where are the derivatives? I mean, where is the dynamics going to come from?
Right. So for the chiral multiplet as such, right? For the full chiral multiplet, which is what is written here. Okay, this Lagrangian is useless because, as you say, it has no dynamics, no derivatives. Okay?
Right.
But when you embed vector multiplet inside chiral multiplet, these fields are like some composite fields of the vector multiplet.
Oh, I see. So the embedding has the derivatives in it.
Yes.
I see.
Right.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. So there is also another density formula called as the linear vector density formula, which was introduced in 1983. Okay, so here you can see the highest number of gravitinos that appear in a term are 4. Okay, but in linear vector density formula it is 2. Okay, we will see why that is relevant later. Okay, am I still audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So this was used, as I said, to write super conformal action for various multiplets. Okay, and this technique of obtaining for one multiplet through an action for another multiplet is called as multiplet calculus. Okay, and this has allowed for construction of minimal Poincare supergravity theories. Okay, as well as construction of higher derivative invariants. Okay, so this is in fact one of the major goals of, let's say, Friedman and Van Proen textbook, or some. So if you are interested, you can find out about the historic things there. And therefore, because these give you new Poincare supergravity invariants, okay, the study of off-shell representations of superconformal algebra and corresponding actions is interesting. So this is the classification Madhu was referring to, which is not done yet, and there are no yet it is not yet clear how to derive them in the most general case, to give all the off-shell representations at one go and construct all the actions in one. Okay. So now I'll come to our work. Okay.
Wait, Subbu, I just want to say that in about 5 minutes you'll be coming up on 1 hour. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So till when do I go? I thought 1.5 hours.
I think 1.5 hours is but I'm just giving you a heads up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Subbu, one question. So this superconformal algebra is still in 4 dimensions, right? Or
yeah. So superconformal algebra exists up to 6 dimensions.
Okay.
Consistent with Coleman-Mandela theorem.
Yes.
So these techniques are usually applied to 6D, 5D, 4D.
Okay. So for your case, it is in 4 dimensions.
Yeah. I will always work in 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this multiplet was presented by Ivano, Bindusar, and I in 2017. Okay. It has 24 plus 24 degrees of freedom, but it is a matter multiplet. Okay. So this is a real scalar phi of Weyl weight 1, which is why we call it the real scalar multiplet. Okay. And this is a vector which is in 3 adjoint representation of SU2. Okay, SU2 R symmetry, but it is not a gauge field. Okay, and so this has 3 times 12 degrees of freedom. Okay? And this has 6 degrees of freedom. It is a complex triplet of scalars, and this is a real quadruplet of scalars. So if you add all of them, you will get 24. Okay, and in fermions, this is a completely symmetric ijk in SU2. So 4 under SU2, and a Majorana spinor. So 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, and this is 2 times 4 is 8. So 16 plus 8 is 24. So 24 bosonic plus 24 fermionic degrees of freedom. Okay, I think I'll skip how we derived this multiplet. Maybe I'll mention in a very short summary. So so we constructed it for some other reasons, but we found that there was a flat space multiplet, okay, constructed by Howe, Strille, Townsend. So our analysis couples it to conformal supergravity. Okay, and in the so now in this 24 plus 24 real scalar multiplet, okay, this field Eij, it has a chiral weight -1. So what we were doing is basically we were thinking, so this is a very big multiplet, right? If we use this as the compensator multiplet, we will get a Poincare supergravity with lot of degrees of freedom, which is probably not what we want, because we are usually interested in minimum number of components. Okay? So we thought, is there a way to restrict this multiplet? Okay? So in that, analogous to chiral multiplet, we asked if we can restrict Eij. But Eij does not have chiral weight 0. It has chiral weight -1. Okay, so we can't ask it to be real.
Hello.
Complex, so 2 real parameters plus triplet, so 3. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 degrees of freedom. Whereas if it is a face up to a real triplet, okay, then this is 1 plus 3, 4 degrees of freedom. So this constraint reduces it from 6 to 4 degrees of freedom. Okay. So, but again, once you impose this constraint, you should take it SUSY variation and see how many number of constraints are there as a multiplet. Okay. And there we found that there are 16 plus 16 constraints. Okay. And once we did that, then we restrict real scale multiplet, which has 8 plus 8 degrees of freedom. Okay. But this might be a bit mysterious in the sense that, like, how does one realize that this will have some constraint and reduce to an 8 plus 8 multiplet? So the answer to that is that we already knew the tensor multiplet that was discussed earlier, and And what we found while doing this analysis is that if we relate 5 power 4 of our multiplet to Lij of the tensor multiplet, okay, then using the tensor multiplet transformation rules, we could consistently map all the components of our multiplet to tensor multiplet combinations. Okay, so that told us that in reality, there are some constraints which will make this 24 plus 24 multiplet have only 8 plus 8 degrees of freedom. Okay, for example, if you look at this Eij, okay, you will realize that I mean, although not easily, you will realize that this Eij is actually real up to a phase factor and so on. Okay, so we knew this. Okay, as in we knew this as in we got this first when we tried to constrain the multiplet. And after that, we went back and we checked whether we could derive the conditions, and we got the conditions. So basically, this is the full mapping. Okay, 5 power 4 is L square, lambda I is given in terms of these fields. Okay, so our multiplet admits an embedding of the tensor multiplet. Okay, so what we did is we found a 24 plus 24 multiplet in conformal supergravity, and we found a tensor multiplet embedding inside that multiplet, and therefore this larger multiplet is interesting. Are there any questions?
I'm good.
Yeah, I have a very basic question. So
Yeah.
I don't understand this. So are you saying that you have found constraints which will reduce the number of like independent like degrees of freedom, or?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, suppose you work in like your usual gravity theory or whatever field theory. Okay, then you could suppose you have, let's say, some complex scalar field. Okay, then you could demand it to be a real scalar field. Okay, unless there is a U1R symmetry. Okay, you could demand it to be real without changing any of the symmetries of the theory. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas in SUSY, what happens is that there is always a set of fields, right? So suppose you impose a condition on one field, okay, then you should consistently impose conditions on every other field so that even after the constraints, they still satisfy the supersymmetry algebra.
Right.
Right. So to do that, what you do is begin with one constraint, okay, then keep taking supersymmetry variations. You will keep finding new constraints. Okay.
I see. Okay.
If they all close to each other at some point, okay, then that means there is a consistent set of constraints.
Okay. So
if it is not consistent with supersymmetry algebra, the set of constraints, okay, then either you will get a contradiction, okay, in between, okay, where some condition was there in the first step and some later step is violating it, or you will find that the constraints don't close. Okay, something keeps popping up.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying that you started off with way too many degrees of freedom and you wanted to impose constraints, and you observed that you could do this Eij equal to e power minus that thing.
Yeah.
And then you calculated all the constraints and saw that it is closing, and then you reduced from 24 to 8.
Yeah.
So now firstly, so this condition that it be real, the constraint that is like is that some physical input, or what should you consider?
Actually, so far we are not doing any physics, right? Physics starts when we have an action, right? Mm-hmm. So here what we are doing is that there is a symmetry algebra, right?
Yeah.
We are studying what are the representations of this symmetry algebra off shell.
Yeah.
So we have not even imposed any on shell condition. So depending on the Lagrangian, when we write Lagrangians for these off shell fields, that will tell us some physics.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that clear? So far there is a representation of superconform just 24 plus 24.
Hello.
Yo, what happened?
So I don't know. I think Subbu dropped.
Oh, I thought I got cut off.
No. I think he just went silent. Subbu, are you still there?
One second.
I can't hear Subbu.
Yeah, also a screen. I can't see the screen either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it suddenly said the host muted everyone.
Okay.
Oh, that's not true.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Yeah. Okay. So these fields transform. Okay. So superconformal algebra representations are more tricky. Okay, and they so what we are saying now is that can we consistently impose some constraints within superconformal algebra, obeying superconformal algebra?
Right. So should we think of this as one particular type of superconformal gravity or something? Because you're saying that the most general case you would have 24 plus 24. Then you imposed a constraint. You've got these, which is completely constrained. So
It
should
is
we think
one.
of,
Yeah, it is one sub case. Yeah. I mean,
Subcase.
basically, for every optional multiplet, whatever Lagrangian you write, whatever conditions you impose, you'll get new Lagrangians, new
Absolutely.
physics.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So I'll skip how we derived this. So what we then did, we used the formalism that I described earlier. Okay, but we now take the gauge fields E mu A and psi mu I. Okay, the Gravitino and Vejlbein. Okay, and so we have geometrized Q supersymmetry. So and demand covariant closure of this. Covariant closure because so when we start with some form, okay, like for example, with some number of Gravitino term we start with, okay, that term we already demand to be invariant with all the bosonic transformations like dilatations and so on, okay, and Lorentz transformations and so on. Okay. So the only thing which is non-trivial is Q SU C invariance. Okay, S SU C invariance is also can also be managed in a very simple way. So Q SU C invariance we geometrize, okay, and yeah, in component formalism it was systematized in this paper, okay, for n equal to 4 supergravity. So what you do is you write the exterior derivative of EA, okay. For example, Vejlbein goes to Gravitino, okay, replace the parameter by the field, okay, gauge field, that gives you the exterior derivative of the Vejlbein, okay. So it is nothing but the torsion, okay. So similarly, you can, so, okay, maybe I should explain this. So the J, we are expanding in terms of number of Vejlbeins and number of Gravitinos, okay. So for example, there is one term which has 4 Gravitinos. There is one term which has 3 Gravitino. There is one term which has 2 Gravitino and so on, okay. So we ask, what happens when exterior derivative acts on the Gravitino sitting outside? What happens when we act it on the Vejlbein sitting outside? What happens when we act on the covariant object which is sitting outside? Okay. So we can define, for example, the Gravitino also we can define all these torsion terms, okay, which is not very important. Okay. But okay, also this 3 by 2 is not there, so it's a typo, so forget it. So there is only these terms, okay. So what we have done here is that Q SU C of any field phi, okay, an abstract field phi, is the covariant derivative will be the Q generator acting on it times the gauge transformation parameter, which is the Gravitino. Okay. So for the field phi, it is abstract. Okay. So what we will now do is we will just apply it one by one. For example, for our density formula, we begin with 3 Gravitinos and 1 Vejlbein. Okay, and we have this. This is some covariant term. Okay, as I said, it is very easy to impose these Weyl invariants and so on. Just check the Weyl weight of all the other terms. They should have the opposite one so that Lagrangian has 0 Weyl weight. Okay, so it fixes the Weyl weight. It fixes the chiral weight. Okay, which is the charge under U1R symmetry. Okay, and so on. Okay, and what you do is you apply the exterior derivative on this. So then by Clebsch-Gordan decomposition, you will get various terms. Okay, if you act the Q generator on sigma ijk using Clebsch-Gordan decomposition of SU2, you can ask what all representations appear and in what way. Okay. So that is the first step. Okay. Okay, apply Q SUSY on exterior derivative on this and get the Clebsch-Gordon decomposition to write what are the fields that appear in the next step of the density formula. Okay, and when you impose covariant closure, okay, you will get some conditions on these. Okay? So at every step, like we begin with 3 gravitino, right? So for example, if you apply delta half, okay, then you will get 1 extra gravitino. So you will get 4 gravitinos in total. But there are also other terms which give 4 gravitino. For example, if there are 2 Weyl-Bines and 2 gravitinos, then we know that Weyl-Bine goes to 2 gravitinos under this exterior derivative. Okay? So all those terms have to cancel among each other, which will give some conditions on these composites. For example, this AAB IJKM in general can appear in this in the transformation of this field, but it won't appear. It is set to 0, and you keep doing that, you get a new density formula. In fact, even the chiral density formula discussed earlier can be obtained this way. Okay. So here, as you can see, unlike chiral density formula, it starts with 3 gravitinos. Okay. So now again, we need to find an embedding. Okay. You might ask, what is the relation of this with all what we discussed so far? Because it has neither real scalar multiplet or the tensor multiplet. The relation is that this sigma JMN, okay, this admits an embedding of the real scalar multiplet. Okay? And therefore, it also admits an embedding of the tensor multiplet. Okay? Is this point? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So can I make a joke first and then ask a question related to the joke? Yeah. So are you sure you didn't miss a factor of 1/2 somewhere? I guess my question is really that this seems like a fantastically involved and complicated calculation. Right. So one of the questions I have is, I mean, so you have this expression here, right? Right. How does what is the check that this is the correct density formula, or this density formula gives sensible Poincare supergravity actions? Like I'm just trying to wrap my head around how you would go about. Is there an independent way to check this, or is it within the framework there is enough consistency requirements that you can?
Yeah, actually, superconformal algebra is extremely powerful. That it can restrict things very tightly. Like if you did an error in one step, it will immediately be visible in the next step, in the sense that these constraints, right? Suppose you impose them wrongly in one step, okay, it will reflect in the next step because there won't be any multiplet of that form. Okay? And because these objects that appear in the density formula, just like chiral multiplet, this is also some other multiplet.
Right.
And superconformal algebra is extremely restrictive. But just for the sake of like the calculations, this density formula verification is not very hard. Like since we have given the calculation in the paper, right? An expert in the field can verify it in like 1 or 2 days. This calculation, but the embedding is the more non-trivial part, and I have no easy answers for this. Like I'll show you the
sigma JMN, that one.
See, this is the Lagrangian of the tensor multiplet.
Jesus.
Okay, and it has coefficients like 313/48. Right?
What is going on?
So how do we know that this is the correct Lagrangian?
If there is 323, normally I think that's wrong. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, see 1643/24, right? So this one, right? There are people who do it with Cadabra and Verify and so on, right? But there is no.
Derive this?
Yeah. So this is my 1.5 years of work. But anyway, one thing is that the crazy coefficients are there because after doing the work, okay, we found that even in 6D, someone derived a density formula, which may be related to this by dimensional uplift or reduction, okay, which looks similar, okay. And their Lagrangian also has crazy coefficients, okay. So we know that the crazy coefficients will appear, but how to check this is still a hard problem. For example, since I have done the calculation, right, I know with absolute certainty what things are right. Okay? But it still needs, for example, when Bindusar and Bernard and so on, they took up n = 4 supergravity, right? there also, they found a lot of errors in the results which were presented in 1980s.
Right.
Yeah. So
I mean,
that
this is what I mean, is that like, I'm sure
Yeah.
the guys back then were also absolutely confident. No, not even well-meaning, like absolutely confident that the numbers are correct. So I'm just trying to understand.
Right.
So I take your point that once you have the density, if you can just go back a couple of slides, once you have the density, maybe one more. Yeah. So once you have this density formula, and if you are an expert in the field, then you can go about checking that, you know, let's say the right tensor structures appear and the right contractions are sort of intuitively, let's say. But I'm just trying to see if is the idea that you can use this to compute a number that you know how to compute using a different technique, because that is what I would call a check, right?
Right.
So I'm trying to understand what
they don't exist, because the basic problem is, like, after this you would do gauge fixing, okay?
Right,
and you will obtain some Poincare supergravity action, or you can extract some terms. And this in 60 they have done. So for whatever action they had got. I mean, we are not completely sure if this is related to that, but there are hints that it is. Okay? But right away constructing that action in Poincare supergravity is not possible. But one physical check is that if you ask, how does this high derivative invariant reflect in black hole entropy? Okay? In whichever case the black hole entropy has already matched, right? There it should not modify the existing answer. So these are called as super renormalization or something like that. Okay? Because this Lagrangian will not need any counter term, so it won't contribute to any black hole entropy because of supersymmetry.
I see.
So those are physical checks, but for that one need to find a black hole situation where this Lagrangian is relevant, okay? and that is not so hard, but for technical reasons we have not done that yet. Like, there are some technical not obstructions, some historic things which were not done, which need to be done.
I see, but you're saying that that would serve as a kind of, at least in principle, one can check by saying that I use this, I construct a black hole that is relevant to this invariant, and then I compute its microscopic entropy, and it should not change the result that is already known or something. So
basically that is the goal as well, to discover like what are all the, like what happens in supergravity that this answer matches that answer, like what are all the invariants in supergravity and why that matches with black hole microscopic computation.
I see. Okay, thanks.
How long did the referee take to get back after seeing that formula?
No, referee replied in 2-3 weeks actually. Okay, so I mean, basically what do you do, right? I mean, in such fields, unless you have a better technique, right, you have to accept the papers and hope that someone else will either correct it or give a better technique, right? You can't say it is not accepted because I can't check it. Because it's impractical for a referee to check it, because even after you get the answer, it takes very long to it takes as long to verify it. So. But I must say the multiplet constructions are very solid. Like, if you ask me, are the coefficients of the transformation rules in the multiplet, which are also horrible, which I have not shown here, okay, they also run pages, okay, but they are very accurate, and that people in the community recognize, because the superconformal algebra is extremely restrictive. So if the coefficients are not right, the multiplet won't satisfy the algebra, and it is easy to check term by term.
Okay.
So
yeah, I think that if I was a referee for a paper, this is a good reason why I will not be, but if I was a referee for this paper, my referee report would be like, I see the number 1643, it's a very significant number, because that was the year when Louis XIV succeeded to the King of France. So I'll be like, so it must be correct or something like that. Just because why not, right? Fuck it, like.
So I was asking that as you're saying that some multiplets, you think that 60 this can be some uplift of or you can uplift it to 6D and do that. So is those kind of things can be a check, right? I mean, if you have and same
Oh
kind of,
yeah, definitely, yeah. So the 6D invariant, whatever they have, okay. If we figure out the dimensional reduction, okay, that is also a check.
right.
But they are not usually available. I mean, here we happen
Right.
to be lucky that we constructed something in 4D. We didn't know it was there in 6D. There was something in 6D, but usually there isn't. And then what do you do? I mean, and it's not even like one can derive this easily. Like the existence of this multiplet, the embedding, the density formula, and the density formula admitting this embedding, all of these are not trivial steps in the sense that we didn't know beforehand that it would work. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. So right. So basically that's it. So this sigma ijk which appears here, it has an embedding in terms of the real scalar multiplet and hence the tensor multiplet. Okay. And yeah. So there is some future work which is basically if we take this tensor multiplet action as the compensator multiplet action, then what Poincare supergravity invariant we will get. Okay, but before that, I mean, for black hole entropy, people have so far not used tensor multiplet compensators also, whereas it can be used. There is no obstruction. So first we have to use the tensor multiplet compensator for the quadratic theory, and then later look at this higher derivative invariants. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, this is all basically what we have done.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So
I'm still recording, I would like to say. So, like, if it, yeah, yeah, sorry,
no,
go
it's
on.
a serious question. Don't
Okay,
worry.
yeah, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was saying that so far you have not actually. I mean, this is all off shell, right? Or am I mistaken in this?
Yeah, this is all off shell in the sense that this Lagrangian,
Yeah.
okay, the transformation rules don't depend on this Lagrangian.
Okay. Yeah.
But once you have this, I mean, and in fact that is the point. Like at the level of conformal gravity, it is still off shell. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But once you go to Poincare supergravity, it can be on shell. Okay? So the motivation for that is that you want to construct general actions in conformal gravity so that you can have like more number of invariants in Poincare gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, if you keep it off shell, then with the same transformation rule, you can construct different Lagrangians. So that's why, yeah, in conformal supergravity.
How do you do this? How do you go? I mean, go on shell. Like, did you add a gravity action of whatever you're choosing, and then you add
basically there are some auxiliary fields, right? In the Lagrangian, right? Once you write the Lagrangian, there are some auxiliary fields. If you eliminate them by their equations of motion, it becomes on shell.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, I must say now we are with Madhu and Bindusar, we are constructing an n is equal to 3 supergravity action with this formalism. Bindusar and I had reconstructed the n is equal to 3 Weyl multiplet because the existing one had some issues. So now we are constructing the action, but that won't be this messy. So that much I can say.
I can also say that I am enjoying this work a great deal with Subbu and Bindusar.
Oh, not Madhusudan Raman. Yeah. Madhu Mishra. Yeah, this keeps happening. Yeah.
I was thinking, how many pots does Madhu is?
The actual Madhu, who is Madhu Mishra, not
the actual Madhu, yeah.
Not the Sudan Madhu.
Okay, are there any other questions? Otherwise, I will pause recording. Or go, Arnab?
No, not.
No, I'm good.
Okay, then let's just thank Subbu once again.